decided to make this video as yesterday I had quite a lot of electrical work done in my home and I didn't have any electricity for some time, so I decided to read a book. And I decided to read this book, or reread this book by George Orwell, Animal Farm. And I haven't read this book for many years, and it was great just to read a book from start to finish in one day, really take it all in. And for those of you who are perhaps familiar with George Orwell, that's actually not his real name, it's actually his pen name. This book was the one that actually brought him to fame, which was actually written before 1984. This book was written a few years earlier, and it is an analogy of the Russian Revolution in 1917, followed by the reign of Stalin after that. And this book is actually a work of genius, and it has a lot of very relevant information for exactly the events that are transpiring in 2020. So much that I was reading the book, I was just having so many aha moments. In fact, this book is almost a script for what is actually occurring now, and also combined in a certain way with a companion novel, 1984, which was written in 1948, just to reverse the numbers to give it this dystopian future, which he is much better well known for. Now, as I said, this book is an analogy for the Russian Revolution, which is quite ironic in a way because Orwell himself actually went to Eton College, which is a very elite school in England. So he was obviously from a middle class background. And he's written this book with a certain amount of genius to portray the psychology, the events of the Russian Revolution, and particularly following it, as portrayed, if you're not familiar with the book, I really highly recommend reading it, as being a revolution of animals on a farm. And the animals basically rise up and rebel against the farmer. Now, the farmer is basically Tsar Nicholas II, who they expel from the farm, and then they take over the farm and start running it themselves. Now, many of the characters are basically linked directly to historical figures that were prominent in the Russian Revolution, such as Major, which is combining the ideas of Marx and Lenin, and Napoleon, who's the head pig, is representing Stalin. And then there's also the other characters that represent certain people, particularly Snowball is another one who represents Trotsky. So it's complicated representation, particularly with the consciousness is what we can take away from it today with the certain figures of the Russian Revolution, and particularly the agenda of socialism, collectivism, the Bolshevik Revolution, even borderlining on communism, depending on how you want to categorize these organizing of society in a certain way, just more isms. But this is really the agenda of the elite that is unfolding at a rapid pace in 2020. And so many of the principles that are represented in this book, we can see. For example, the leftist agenda, which has really been highlighted through this year with this virtue signaling, with this really actions based on emotion, not logic, so-called progressive liberalism, whatever name you want to give to it, has really been highlighted by a lot of dysfunction. And this dysfunction is characteristic with some of these socialist agendas. Now, if this information is new to you, there's a clear push at a global level, globalization in itself, for the planet to embody and embrace socialist ways of living. And that is no joke. And this is really the bigger agenda that's behind a lot of the events that we're seeing unfold in 2020. Of course, there's the virus itself, but the implementation of many of the restrictions, the loss of liberties, loss of freedoms, this is what socialism is. And people that think this is a good thing should study history, because many people think studying history is particularly antiquated or a bit boring or banal type, topic. But it reveals so much, because the genius of Orwell in this book, Animal Farm, is that it's written like as a satire with a lot of irony, is that basically the pigs take over and they gradually implement their own agenda that's originally based on collectivism, and slowly they actually become no different to the capitalist farmers and have build up relationships with the farmers who are next door and so on. It's actually brilliant. For example, in the beginning, they changed the farm from manor farm to animal farm, but at the end of the book, they changed it back to manor farm again. And the pigs actually even start to walk on two legs and even dress with humans, and they gradually, slowly, and this is how tyranny is actually implemented, eradicate the past and create this new future that is based on total tyranny and authoritarianism. And for example, one of the principles they have is that no animal shall sleep in a bed. And then they change that later on to no animals shall sleep in a bed with sheets. So gradually the original vision, the ideas that were had of this equality and so many of the good things that socialism considers to be appealing get weeded out. And this is exactly the whole way that socialism always goes. It's actually, look at the failed socialist states around the world. It actually doesn't work. And the other thing that it's actually really disturbing is the loss of freedom, loss of tyranny, the tyranny that is occurring right now. So obviously in Melbourne have gone back into a full lockdown for 6 weeks. There was thousands of people in those towers, 3,000 people in those towers basically couldn't leave. I mean, that's a complete abuse of human rights, without any doubt. There's no question. It's out in the public domain. The information's not hidden anywhere. There's been a complete abuse of human rights there. And the thing that people don't understand about socialism is the people at the top don't really have this equality-based income in mind. For example, Daniel Andrews, the Premier of Victoria, is the highest paid Premier in Australia. And in 2019, he was given a pay rise of $46,522. And his total salary is now $441,439. Does that sound like equality and equal distribution of income and resources to you? Of course not, because it's never meant to be that way. So we really need to look at what's going on, look at history, look at these other failed states that have suffered bitterly because of socialism. And in fact, portraying coming back to Animal Farm, it's always the same, is that the resources start to get more and more accumulated in the hands of the few, and the workers are actually more and more disadvantaged in this way. Many of the animals in the farm, they actually are really well-meaning, well-intended. For example, Boxer the horse, he has 2 dictums, and the first one is, I will work harder, and everything Napoleon is always right, which shows that he completely trusts the leaders. He completely trusts the ruling class to do the right thing by him. And the sad state of affairs, if you read this book, is actually hurts in your heart, because you see that this is exactly what's happening today, that so many well-meaning people, they actually trust the government, they trust the media. Your government is lying to you. The media is lying to you. I mean, this whole COVID-19 is a complete farce. This has got nothing to do with health at all. And antidepressant use in Queensland is up 10% between January and May this year alone. Flu deaths on average in Australia are between 1,500 and 3,000 a year, per year. And even with a vaccine, there's never been a way to eradicate the flu. And yet COVID deaths in total in Australia are 106, which is questionable as to whether those people died of COVID or with COVID. Now, I won't go into that argument at all tonight, but understand that this issue of health in regard to this pandemic, it's a smokescreen for authoritarianism, for tyranny, for creeping authoritarianism to reduce your freedoms, your liberties, and your ability to go around and have a lot of the values and lifestyle choices that we have taken for granted until this year. So this is really unfortunate that this is occurring, and yet so many people are completely unaware of what the true agenda is. And again, this is represented in Animal Farm with the sheep who simply repeat the dictum, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. And it's a rejection of the farm and so on. but they accept this mantra and repeat it. And yet we have exactly the same kind of consciousness that's showing with this crisis, where these mantras such as stay home, save lives, wash your hands, all these kind of things are just absorbed by so many people and then parroted without questioning the information, without analysing the information, without putting things in context. And it's really like a smokescreen for this creeping authoritarianism. And again, it's just like parroted values. And this is really what is a real issue in regard to virtue signaling of the left, because really virtue signaling is like a moral value to enhance social standing. And when we look at things like the ongoing virtual signaling that's particularly used by the left, they use it to manipulate people's consciousness, to simply guide people into a certain funnel, to adopt certain values, belief systems, and so on. Now, it's not necessarily that these particular social topics are good or bad or not valid. It's just that the person who is doing the virtue signaling, which is in essence like a sheep in the animal farm analogy, is basically adopting these values, these belief systems, without considering the information, without any critical thinking, without any critical evaluation, and then just parroting them back to other. And that is really one of the biggest features that has been so disappointing to see this year, is that people are starting to police each other. And that's a real creeping sign of socialism, because that's actually what's occurred in previous socialist countries, where there is this kind of dobbing in your neighbours type mentality, which has really been shown in Australian culture, particularly with this crisis. Now, the virtue signalling of topics, for example, like global warming. Now, I'm not saying global warming isn't real, is fake. That's not the point I'm making in this way. Due to humans, let's put that in context, man-made global warming. But the virtue signalers are basically, they have no follow-through. And this is because virtue signalers don't actually know who they are. They don't have any self-confidence. They don't have their own identity. They're actually afraid to think outside the herd and think for themselves. And so they parrot whatever is trending in these sort of social, economic, political, environmental topics to kind of gain credibility, gain social status, without actually really having any endurance. Because if we look at global warming, that topic in what's happened in 2020, no one talks about it anymore. And that's exactly the practice of social virtue signalers, is that they basically hop from topic to topic to topic, and there's no lack of depth. Like, they change their profile on social media to adopt these mantras, these slogans, these symbols, whatever it is, without really embodying, embracing that particular topic and going into it and having this longevity. It just changes again and again. And particularly with the COVID-19 crisis, we can see that the social engineering that is trying to manifest by the powers that be is that fear is a virtue. Fear is never a virtue. And this is one of the biggest things that we've seen as far as this crisis goes, is that basically people are trying to embody fear as something that is something to be celebrated. We should all be afraid of this virus, even though it has a greater than 99% survival rate, and trying to engineer people in their consciousness to believe that fear is actually a virtue, which is completely ridiculous and completely opposite of any kind of genuine well-being and genuine health for any of us. So this is a real wake-up call for all of us, because these types of issues that we're facing today in 2020 are not going to go away, because there is social engineering. There is a much bigger agenda that's trying to be unrolled by the elite, and they don't have your best interests in mind. And it's simply a case of having the eyes to see, because I know that many people in the awakening community are very frustrated with people who just simply don't have the ability to critical think. And going back to the animal farm analogy, this is actually the case with Boxer the horse, who's very valiant, very well-meaning, very hard-working, but just can't see. Even with the alphabet, Boxer can't actually write or understand past the letter D. And towards the end of the book, when years pass on the farm, the animals, the newer animals, can't understand past the letter B. And it's such an analogy, it's such an amazing insight into the dumbing down of our culture through people not reading novels, through not studying, through not doing research, and just watching and accepting everything they see on TV, all this superficial social engineering, programming of their mind, engaging of their subconscious with certain values, belief systems without any critical thinking. And this is the way that there's this mass social engineering is able to occur through engineering the herd. And even at the end of the book in Animal Farm, the pig who's responsible for the propaganda, he actually gets the sheep to change their mantra from 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, to 4 legs good, 2 legs better. And not only that, one of the other dictums that they change is all animals are equal, and they change that from all animals are equal, but some are more equal than others. And that really sums up the true consciousness behind tyranny, behind creeping authoritarianism, behind loss of privacy, behind all the things that 2020 is revealing to us. So it's really time for us to think about the legacy that we'll leave behind, what we are doing to contribute to the welfare for future generations, and to really take on board where things are going. Because in Australia, we're basically a testing ground. Now, granted, things are not as bad as what is occurring in New Zealand. Arguably, some of the measures regarding internet censorship and privacy and even full-term abortions in New Zealand is deeply concerning, deeply troubling, and the socialist agenda that's being rolled out there. But the real issue is that we are able to stop this because we are responsible for creating the society that we want to live in. And I know that there's a lot of people out there that think they're in the middle class, particularly what's occurring in Melbourne. And a lot of people, it was obvious that they went and picked on the disadvantaged people, the people who were perhaps lacking in certain resources to defend themselves legally and deal with all these oppression that they're experiencing by being locked up in those towers, which is a complete violation of human rights. But guess what? Now, people are being locked up in South Yarra, people are being locked up in Toorak, people are being locked up in Malvern, people are being locked up in Brighton. So don't think you're above it, because you've got to understand that the way the elite think is that we're all pawns. And it doesn't matter your postcode, it doesn't matter if you have a self-managed super fund, it doesn't matter if you have an investment property. The middle class is going to be destroyed. Can you not see what's occurred during this lockdown? That the big corporations were able to function like normally. Places like Bunnings, the supermarkets, all the big corporations, even some of them were bailed out. And yet the small businesses had to close because of the regulations. And this is part of the globalist agenda. And this will continue until we put a stop to it. This will continue until we speak out. And this will continue until we take individual and personal responsibility for the type of society that we want to live in, the type of world that we want to live in, and co-create for the future. And I think it's really about time, particularly with what's occurring in Australia, that it's really time to think about this virus from a statistical point of view is no way near as dangerous as the hysteria, as the fear-driven propaganda that you're seeing day in and day out on the mainstream media. It is actually a smokescreen for a much bigger agenda, and it is being rolled out. And people watching this in Melbourne need to think about it, because it doesn't matter what suburb you're in now, it doesn't matter what socioeconomic status you have or you perceive that you have been locked in your home yet again for another 6 weeks. And I think it's time that we stand together and start to tell the government what kind of world we want to live in, and that they need to represent our values, our belief systems, and our interests. Thanks for watching. We live in epic times.